How's it going, everybody? Mr. Holton here, and while we're gonna have to wait probably a couple of months more until the release of Dragon Age the Veilguard, that doesn't mean that we all have to go starving for new info anymore, at least I hope so. And why I say this is because there has been a new cover story, so to speak, from Edge magazine, where we find out some new info regarding the Veilguard. Now, I want to give a massive shout out to Falassen here, both on Twitter and on Tumblr, because Falassen has gone ahead and essentially just transcribed the entire interview, and so we're seeing parts of what the devs over at Bioware has said about the game, and some of this new info is in this big article. And in this video, I'm essentially just gonna read this word for word as it says here from Falassen's blog here on Tumblr. And as I've already read through this myself, I have to say that yes, there are some new things that we didn't know before here. And so starting off here, we get some words from John Epler, who is the director for Dragon Age the Veilguard, where he sort of explains what Dragon Age is all about, saying there's definitely some standard fantasy stuff in Dragon Age, but everything in the world, every force is because of someone. The idea is that every group and faction needs to be represented by a person, someone that you can relate to. Big political forces are fine as background, but they don't provide you with those interesting story moments. So examples here obviously are the Grey Wardens and then the Inquisition, of course, where we both represent two of these factions as both the Inquisitor and the hero of Ferelden. They talk a little bit about the namesake of this Dragon Age game. Dragon Age the Veilguard bears out that philosophy. The long-awaited sequel was first announced with the subtitle Dreadwolf in reference to its antagonist Solus, an ancient elf who once stripped his people of immortality as punishment for betraying one of their own. In doing so, Solus created the Veil, the thin barrier through which wizards pull spirits and demons invade the waking world. In other words, many of Dragon Age's defining features, from its downtrodden elves to the uneasy relationship between mages and a fearful church, can be traced right back to one character's decision. The world exists as it does because of Solus, says Epler. He shaped the world because of the kind of character he was. That's, to me, what makes Dragon Age so interesting. Everything can tie back to a person who, to some degree, thought they were doing the right thing. Now, they also go into how this next game really started developing, where Epler explains the following. We tried a bunch of different ideas early on, but the form the Veilguard has taken in is, in a lot of ways, the form that we were always pushing towards. We were just trying different ways to get there. There was that moment where we really settled on, this is a single-player, story-focused RPG, and that's all it needs to be. Because as you may know, this project started off as a live service idea, and I'm so happy that they decided to go the single-player route, the one thing that Bioware is most known for. Now, Epler also mentions a comparison to shaping a marble statue in the form of an elephant, and I've heard this one before from them. Epler imagines a block of marble from which Bioware was attempting to carve an elephant, a character and story-driven game. We were chipping away, and sometimes it looked more like an elephant, and sometimes it didn't. And he's obviously talking about the fact that the game and the Dragon Age franchise has always been a sort of like a fine line between either like an action game and a dialogue-driven character game together with the strategic elements of the game, and so they were struggling with this idea of what is Dragon Age supposed to be, really. And then they eventually realized, just make an elephant. When we got to that, it almost just took shape by itself. So essentially just going back to their roots with good storytelling and good characters. They talk about Dragon Age Inquisition here for a bit. It was an open world game, commonly criticized for a slow-paced starting area which distracted players from the thrust of the plot. The Veilguard, in contrast, is mission-based, constructed with tighter, bespoke environments designed around its main story and cast. We wanted to build a crafted, curated experience for the player, Epler says. Pacing is important to us, and making sure that the story stays front and center. And we've heard them talk about this before, that the Veilguard will be a much tighter experience. I'm thinking more along the lines of Mass Effect 2, which is a good thing because that is an excellent game when it comes to character building and, choices, repercussions, all that good stuff, but just the narrative is just so tight and so focused. I'm hoping that is what essentially they're trying to go for with the Veilguard. And they also mention here that they want an increased sense of urgency with the story, because one thing that annoyed a lot of players is that when you start off in Inquisition, you spend so many hours in the hinterlands, and a lot of people just never leave the hinterlands because it's just, there's just so much stuff to do do and so many things to find there. And while that's cool, it does get very grindy in nature, and I don't think that's essentially what they really intended when they made that part of the game. It's just, it's one of the least liked parts of Inquisition as far as I get it from other people who's played through the game. And so I'm glad they're saying this, that the story is tighter and the focus on the main narrative pushes you forward. I like that. They do mention, though, that there's going to be exploration. There's still exploration. There's still the ability to go into some of these larger spaces and go off the beaten path to do side quests. But there's always something in the story propelling you and the action forward and allowing you to make decisions with these characters where the stakes feel a lot more immediate and present, and also, honestly, more real. They also bring up an interesting example here of you as Rook being able to either start a bar brawl from essentially threatening the barkeep or making a deal with said barkeep. I guess that's what they're trying to say here. So right from the get-go, you can make these decisions that make a really cool impact on the first hours of the game, it would seem. And that is essentially what leads you down into this section from the gameplay reveal that we got where, we see Rook talking with Varric and then meeting up with Nav Gallus. And now they delve into some of the ideas for the architecture and how they imagined that Minrathous should be represented by saying, when your Dragon Age Inquisition companion Dorian joins you in Orlais, in one of the biggest cities in Thedas, he mentions that it's quaint and cute compared to Minrathous. That one bit of dialogue was our guiding principle on how to realize this city. It is sprawling, it is lived in, sometimes it's grimy, sometimes it's bougie, but it is expansive. And they mentioned here that they essentially shot for the moon when they were designing this big city, because obviously you want to impress people with what previous characters in Dragon Age have said about this place. And from the gameplay reveal and from various, teasers we've gotten past before, we do see that this city is very interesting from a design perspective. It does not look like anywhere else on Thedas that we've seen before. In all honesty, it kind of looks a little bit cyberpunky or Blade Runner-ish, which they also mentioned in this issue. They also mentioned that they have introduced ray-traced reflections, and for anyone who's used ray tracing, for example, in Cyberpunk 2077, you guys know how good that can look, especially in that type of setting, where there's a lot of rain, there's a lot of reflections. I can't wait to see how this is going to look when you're actually playing this game maxed out. It's also supposedly very layered as a city, so it's like stacked where if you look below you, there seems to be the idea that you can look down on another street level and another street level after that, so it's like it's a layered city, interestingly. I wonder if it's something that you can actually explore or if that's just supposed to be the feeling. I think what they're trying to say here is that it's supposed to make you feel like the city is massive, but maybe not necessarily that you can explore it to the full extent like that, but that would be cool. I would like that. Sort of like what we saw with Baldur's Gate 3, right? They talk about how they wanted to start off this game with sort of like this explosive intro. We wanted the prologue to feel like the finale of any other game we've done, where it puts you right into this media res attack on a city and gets you really invested in the action and the story right away. When I think back to Inquisition, how the sky was literally tearing open, the impact of this ritual really makes that look like a minor inconvenience, which, we saw some pieces of in the gameplay reveal. I mean, it looks pretty cool, but they obviously cut away bits and pieces of that whole intro, so we didn't see the full intro in of itself, but, I see what they're going for here. I can't say that I felt like it was that, big, massive ritual compared to the intro in Inquisition, but maybe that's something that they're going to improve upon, or maybe it's something that they have improved upon, because I'm still not sure if that gameplay reveal was actually dated or if it was something that was new. Now, they also delve into some of the details about the combat in the Veilguard, and the game director, Bush, says this: responsiveness was our first and foremost goal with this baseline layer of the combat system. Unless you're activating a high-risk, high-reward ability such as charged attack, any action can be animation cancelled, which is huge, allowing you to abort a sword swing and dive away if an enemy lunges too close. We very much wanted you to feel like you exist in this space as you're going through these really crafted, hand-touched worlds, that you're on the ground in control of every action, every block, and every dodge. Anyone who's ever bounced off of a Souls-like needn't worry. The Veilguard's highly customizable difficulty settings enable you to loosen up parry windows if they prove too demanding. It's cool that they're talking about parry windows and being able to animation cancel and stuff like that, so I can't help but think about Devil May Cry when I think about, comparisons like this, where you obviously can animation cancel, and it's a big part of the combat in those games. So it's going to be very interesting. It seems like they've gone full-on action with this. And I know a lot of people are not going to like that, but I'm very interested to see how this is going to look later on. They obviously also talk about that. Gone is the overhead tactical camera, which for some players was a crucial point of connection between Dragon Age and the Baldur's Gate games that came before, tapping into a lineage of thoughtful tabletop-inspired combat. Epler points out that the camera's prior inclusion had an enormous impact on where the game's battles took place. We actually had a mandate on Inquisition, which was, don't fight inside. The amount of extra work on getting that tactical camera to work in a lot of those internal environments, it was very challenging. Now thinking back on it, yeah, there aren't very many indoor combat sections in Inquisition. Most of it is outside in the open world, so to speak. There are some, but they're very few and far between. And whenever you are fighting, you're usually in big open areas, unless it's like in the Descent where there were some places that were very cornered and such because you're running through caves and things. They also talk about the fact that we can't control our companions directly anymore. Gone too is the ability to steer your comrades directly. On the experimental side, we wanted you to feel like you are Rook. You're in this world, you're really focused on your actions, and we very much wanted the companions to feel like they, as fully realized characters, are in control of their own actions. They make their own decisions. You, as the leader of this crew, can influence and direct and command them, but they are their own people. Again, this is something that they've talked a lot about previously, is that they really want the companions to shine and make them feel like actual people in this game and feel like they're truly alive. We'll have to see how that proceeds in the future, but it's interesting to see like how much focus they put on these companions. I don't think I've seen like people talk about their games, like developers talk about their games in this manner where they're completely focused on like hyping up their characters specifically, the companions specifically, of how they're supposed to feel alive, like actual people. Now, Corinne mentions that this is, this whole discussion is not lost on Bioware. I will admit that on paper, if you just read that, you have no ability to control your companions, it might feel like something was taken away. And yes, a lot of people have felt like that when you're reading through the comments everywhere. But in our testing and validating with players, what we find is that they're more engaged than ever. So interestingly, playtesters who have played this game feel like it's actually more engaging than before. There may be a couple of reasons for that. One is that Dragon Age's new dynamic action leaves little room for seconds spent swapping between perspectives. This is a much higher actions per minute game, Bush says. It is more technically demanding on the player, so when we tried allowing you full control of your companions as well, what we found is that it wasn't actually adding to the experience. In fact, in some ways it was detrimental, given the demanding nature of just controlling your own character. This is something that I brought up before when I talked about this game, is I wonder what it would have looked like if they actually kept a lot of the strategic elements of being able to jump to your different companions, but still having this action system that they're having. And it seems like what Corinne is saying here is that it becomes too much for most players. It's just too much multitasking and things to keep track of, and you're already like so fully invested in your Rook when you're playing and you're swapping abilities and you're swapping classes, so it becomes too much, I guess. To some people, that might be enticing. I would have liked to see that. I think that, when I have a lot of stuff to do, I just enjoy the gameplay so much more. But I can understand they're still trying to reach out to a new audience, but while still keeping their main audience as well. I get what they're trying to do here. I'm still curious about how that would have looked. Bioware, however, seemed to be stressing that the pause button is still very important, by saying matching elemental types against weaknesses and resistances is a big key to success in this game. You pick between rogue, warrior, and mage, each role later splitting again into deeper specialisms, and draw from a class-specific resource during fights. A rogue relies on momentum, which is built up by avoiding damage and being highly aggressive, whereas a warrior is rewarded for blocking, parrying, and mitigating damage. So you have your own like resource systems. So I'm guessing that the mage would have mana, and depending on how you play the game, in case you manage to parry different hits, and if you dodge at the right moment, your momentum meter reaches up, and then at the end of the day you can perform an ultimate attack. And that is of course where the ability wheel seems to come in. Those resources are then used on the ability wheel, which pauses the game and allows you to consider your options. The bottom quadrant of the wheel belongs to your character and is where 3 primary abilities will be housed. Rook will also have access to runes, which functions as an ability and a special ultimate ability, Bush says. So you're bringing 5 distinct abilities with you into combat. So for a lot of you who have been a little bit worried about, how many slots are you able to use, and we've heard that it's 3, and we've seen that it's 3, but supposedly you can actually use 5 abilities for each class at one time. And so obviously they also talk about the fact that your companions are going to use their own abilities, just like any other companion-based game. Just like in Mass Effect, you can pause the game and just, pick whatever ability you want them to use, and then they're just going to fight on their own. They also go into this, idea of combo gameplay, because that is also something that was very big in the Mass Effect games, and even a little bit in Inquisition, is that you pull up use an ability like a singularity, and then you use another ability to, detonate that ability for big AoE damage, slowing down the battlefield, things like that. That's something that they bring up here as well. They've also talked about this before. Now, Bush here seems to insist that the shift to a more action-heavy gameplay does not really make it more simple, saying what really makes the combat system, and indeed the extension into the progression system, work is that pause and play tactical element that we know our players expect. So it's still fairly tactical with the pause menu and stuff. Still wonder how that is going to look like in the final product. We still don't really know, because we've only seen like a short segment, I guess, from the intro, where there weren't that very many abilities to use still, and they didn't really show that much when it came to the pause use. So yeah, we'll have to see. They've also been focusing a lot on making sure that the companions sort of live their own lives when you're not using them. So, in order to make sure that people actually mix up their companion picks and not just go with the same companions every time, like when you do in Mass Effect. So maybe you usually pick Rex and Garrus, or maybe, Tali and Liara, and you always stick with those. So they've been trying to make sure that you're forced to mix it up. And supposedly the companions in Veilguard also have like lives outside of whenever, you bring them along. So when you're, for example, they mention here that you can actually stumble upon your companions when you're out doing other quests and stuff. And so you can actually pick up their loyalty, or maybe not loyalty, but their quest, what they're doing, and help them with that. That sounds really interesting. It's not something that I think we've seen much of before. Sure, you can find your companions here and there in other games as well, but not to this extent where you can just pick up their quest lines again. As a quote here, Bush says, "If I go and interact with her, I can actually stop what I'm doing, pick up her arc, and adventure with her throughout her part of the story." Of course, talking about Nev, who we see in the gameplay reveal. And some of these quests with your companions are going to be more combat heavy, some are going to be less combat heavy, maybe and more story focused. It seems like these quests and these missions that you do with your companions are going to be more important than they might seem, or they're going to lead to some very, different outcomes depending on if you help them or not, or whatever they lead up to, as we all know is a big thing in Bioware games. Now, that was essentially the end of this Edge issue, but there is one box here that Felesen has brought up in this text, and here they actually talk about Anthem for a bit, because I think they're trying more and more to be transparent here. It says here, "Rational Anthem. The hard lesson Bioware drew from Anthem was to play to its strength. We're a studio that has always been built around digging deep on storytelling and role-playing. I'm proud of a lot of things on Anthem. I was on the project for a year and a half, but at the end of the day, we were building a game focused on something we were not necessarily as proficient at. For me and for the team, the biggest lesson was to know what you're good at and then double down on it. Don't spread yourself too thin. Don't try to do a bunch of different things you don't have the expertise to do. A lot of the people on this team came here to build a story-focused single-player RPG." So it seems like Epler is saying here, or trying to be transparent at least, in that they knew that Anthem was going to be something really new. It's not something that they are used to making. It's it's an online shooter game with microtransactions. It's not really what they what the studio is good at. And what Epler is saying here is that a lot of the people, probably most of the people at Bioware, signed up because they wanted to do deep RPG games like we've seen before. There's also another interesting thing that's brought up here, according to some RPG aspects that Felesen added. Meteor Maker, full disclosure, Dragon Age has traditionally not done skin tones well, especially for people of color, says Bush. We wanted to do a make good here. In the Veilguard's character creator, you can adjust the amount of melanin that comes through in the skin. That's pretty sick. That sounds like it's relatively advanced. As well as test various lighting scenarios to ensure your protagonist looks exactly as you intend in cutscenes. That's some good shit, because that is a big thing in RPGs. Wherever you can create your character never ends up looking like you want them to. So you end up restarting the whole process and just recreating your character, and you're not happy with that either, so you recreate them again, and then you do that several times until you're like, you just give up, right? Speaking of our first creative principle, be who you want to be, we really feel these are the kinds of features that unlock that for our players. We want everyone to be able to see themselves in this game. I wonder if I'm going to be able to create myself for the first time ever. For the first time in the series, your body type is fully customizable too, with animations, armor, and even romantic scenes reflecting your choices. Interesting. That's going to be really interesting. That sounds to me, now, I'm just guessing here that they've made sure to, if you decide to be a short king, maybe your romance option decides to kneel down and hug you in case you're asking for a hug, like in Baldur's Gate 3. I wonder if that's what they're saying here. That sounds fairly advanced. Looking forward to seeing what that looks like in the game. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. I hope you guys enjoy this little read through. Go ahead and follow Falasin over on Twitter and on Tumblr if you want to. I'll be adding these links to this post as well as their Twitter in the comment section below. And remember, if you do want to see more coverage of Dragon Age RPGs and such, remember to subscribe to the Mr. Holton channel. All right, everybody, have a great day. Mr. Holton signing out.